Dr. Wen, for the kind introduction and the opportunity to speak virtually in Shanghai. It's a shame, of course, that I was supposed to present last March a series of lectures in Shanghai, live with probably most of you present here now. We all know why it's not gone through, but I hope that in the near future, I will have the possibility to present the other lectures live in Shanghai. Today we'll be talking about my PhD research with the question in mind: why do we need a city? And then urbanization of Roman Spain. It's actually Roman Spain and Portugal, but often the Iberian Peninsula is referred to as Spain and derived from the Latin word Hispania, which is the name for the Roman provinces. As you can see, Latin Now is the current project I'm working in, and I will grab the opportunity to talk about that a bit as well to introduce this. So what we do within Latin Now is we investigate the Latinization of the northwestern provinces, Latinization, now northwest. And these two maps at the left, we have the pre-Roman situation. So these are the languages we know of that were spoken in the northwestern provinces. And on the right, we see the 6th century CE situation, where we can see, and especially for the Iberian Peninsula, we can see that many of the languages have died in the Roman period. And one of the factors in this language death of indigenous languages are these cities, the role of the cities. It's a very important aspect of the Roman world. And that's what we will be talking about today. So the Roman Empire is seen as an empire of cities, an empire of 2,000 cities. That was the project in which I did my PhD, a European project, with the estimation of 2,000 cities in the Roman Empire. It's Walter Scheidel who gave his estimation in the early 2000s and stated that the Roman Empire must have had about this number of cities. And from the project we agree that it must be in the low thousands. We will never know the exact number. And one of the things we often see is people trying to create maps. I mean, I did the same. We will see some maps to show this urbanization. And the map now in screen is one of the most famous maps. It's the Pounds map from 1969, a first attempt to show the urbanization of the Roman Empire. And we can see, of course, the Italian peninsula is highly urbanized, and we can see the south of Spain. Admittedly, this is not the Roman Empire. We're missing Africa, and we're missing the Middle East. The northern coast of Africa is also quite densely urbanized, like Baetica and Italy, and the same goes for the eastern part of the Mediterranean. So we have this focus on cities, trying to understand the Roman Empire through cities. And it's quite an old idea. I have two quotes here. The notion of the self-governing town community as the basis of their empire was deeply ingrained in the Roman consciousness. This is Reed in 1913. So it's the self-governing town community. In 1991, Corbier stated, the Roman Empire of the first 3 centuries AD can be seen at a local level as cellular space. With the model of the city, civitas, this is an important term, so it roughly means city, or polis, the Greek word. That is to say, of town and territory, ager, territorium, again, a word we will use today, pertica, and court, which involves town-country relations. So we see that both these authors are showing this idea of the city as the backbone of the Roman Empire. And this idea has continued, although admittedly, I'm not the first to start tearing it apart. So we see that in more modern publications, this basis of the Roman Empire as the civitas, the city as the backbone, has become less focused on cities. So often the civitas, which in Corbier was translated as city, often the civitas is a city, an orbs, and its territory. To put it in English, it's the capital and the territory, which creates a municipality. So it's a region which is controlled by a city, and all these civitates or municipalities together, that's the basic organization of the Roman Empire. And from there, we can start creating this idea of how the Romans controlled the whole empire. So at the left, we see the pre-Roman situation, at least the idea we have. We have this natural landscape, virgin landscape. We see the river flowing, some houses here, some houses there. It's all natural. The pre-Roman people in our romantic mind live in sync with nature. The Romans come and then they do this to the landscape. So they build a city, they create roads. You can see here, the river has been dammed, land has been perfectly divided, and the world has been civilized through cities. So the city has the backbone to create the empire. And with these civitates as the basic structure, we can start building this hierarchy of the Roman Empire. So we have the civitates. I've mentioned capital because, you know, it's the idea of the city, not the territory, but the city territory unit is the civitas, but we want to look at these cities. So we have the civitas capital, and underneath them, of course, in the territory, there's still people living. I mean, it's not only the city. So we might have a port settlement or a vicus, which is a village, a villa, a large farming stead, a mining center. A pagus is a rural community. A mansio is a road station. The contributed civitas is a very interesting thing we should look into with more attention. It's the idea of a civitas being governed by another civitas. We don't know a lot about it. We just have some sources mentioning this. But the lowest level in the Roman mind is the civitas with its capital. And that in the Iberian Peninsula and Dalmatia and Asia, Asia Minor for the Roman Empire, these also have conventus capitals. So that's a juridical layer that we don't find in, although it's not attested in all provinces. But that's a layer, a juridical layer. Then we have a provincial capital, and then all provincial capitals are governed from Rome. Putting this on the map we saw earlier, it would look something like this. So we have Rome here. The Iberian Peninsula has 3 provinces, roughly Tarraconensis, Baetica, and here's Lusitania, with the capitals of Tarraco, Cordoba, and Augusta Merita. And from these, then, from these provincial capitals, the conventus capitals are governed. So Lusitania, for instance, has 3 conventus capitals. There's only 2 lines because Emerita is also a conventus capital. The same goes for Tarraco and Cordoba. So we have these. And then, of course, underneath that layer, that's where the civitates follow. I have not been drawing lines from all the conventus capitals to, especially here in Baetica, to all the small dots. But in the northwest, we can already see something going on here. There's no cities. So we have the conventus capitals. And, well, that's the only lost city in the whole northwestern region. So we have to find out what's going on there. If the Roman Empire is governed by cities, is this not governed? Did the conventus capitals have massive territories? So we have to start looking into this. And we will. But first, we will look at our ideas of the city and the territory. So the Roman orbs or city, we have a very standard idea of it. So this is Barquino, modern day Barcelona, which you might recognize from the poster. And I want to express my thanks to the designer of the poster. That's a beautiful piece of work, and I will print it and hang it in my office. But back to the city, Barquino, clearly a Roman city. We see all these elements we expect in Roman cities. I mean, coming into the cities, the aqueduct at the gates, at the walls, we see some funerary structures outside the city, the main roads crossing the city, and exactly where the main roads are meeting, we find the Forum Temple complex. And we can continue this list of buildings we expect in a Roman city. And we see this in quite some publications. We see people looking at specific building types to identify the city. Admittedly, I did the same in my PhD because it's a very easy way to recognize places. And we have a good basis for doing this because this list I show you here, the orthogonal plan, so the roads being in a nice square grid, the Forum Temple complex, the walls, the baths, the theater, these are mentioned in the works of Vitruvius, a drawing in a later manuscript, but a more famous drawing is the Vitruvian Man we know from Leonardo da Vinci, which is a description by Vitruvius. It's an author in Roman times, Augustan times, who wrote the Architectura about architecture, and he describes what the city looks like. And he mentions all these buildings. He mentions that the Forum Temple complex is at the crossing of the main roads. Paul Zanker has stated that the Roman city, the Forum Temple complex, is what sets the Roman city apart from the Greek polis. This is in the Roman world, politics and religious are brought together, where in the Greek world, temples and political centers are segregated and not together. This is not the case in a Roman city. So if we have Vitruvius mentioning this in his book on the Architectura, we should look for other sources proving that we need buildings in a city. And luckily, we have the city laws from the Iberian Peninsula. One of the famous ones is the Lex Colonia Genitivae, created in 44 BC by Caesar when he granted the settlement of Urso the colonial rights. So the full name of the colonia is Colonia Genitiva Iulia Urso. And we have the law here as a depiction of the law. This is how it is mounted on a wall in a museum in Madrid. And in addition to this law from 44 BC, we have the Lex Flavia Municipalis from the Flavian period. And we have several versions of it, at least. We know it had 10 tables. The largest inscription we have of the Lex Flavia Municipalis is known as the Lex Irnitana from the place Irni. And it must have had 10 large bronze tablets like these because of the numbering. And so this drawing shows how these would have been, and also it shows which ones have been found. The red striped ones are not in the Lex Irnitana, so the other ones we have from the Lex Irnitana. Then we have the Lex Alpensa, so it's another place from which we have a small section overlapping the third tablet of the Lex Irnitana. And then we have the sixth one. That's where we're lucky enough to have the Lex Malicitana, which has a part of the sixth tablet and then fully the seventh, and a small bit of the eighth has been found. So we know that multiple places had the same law because these laws are overlapping and the same. So when we look into these two laws, we can actually find 4 of the buildings mentioned by Vitruvius, mentioned in these laws. So the Forum, the sacred places, the roads and the baths are found in Vitruvius and in the laws. We find 2 new buildings or structures mentioned, and that's the sewer and the market hall. So these things are regulated in the laws. These are mentioned as tasks for one of the magistrates to take care of. And then implied but not mentioned as a building are the theater. For the theater, it's implied because theater games are mentioned and the seating plan when people are watching theater games is mentioned. So we know that in Roman theaters, people were sitting according to their status. So the high status people up front and low status people back in the end. And then we know that there must have been a treasury and there must have been archives, because public money and the public archives are being spoken of in the laws, but not the specific buildings that were needed for these. And then we can turn to specific cities. So this is Taraco. This is the colonia and the capital of one of the three provinces of Hispania Interior, one of the three provinces of the Iberian Peninsula. I have in the upper corner a small map for orientation, so we can see where Taraco is at the coast. You can see it here as well. It's the coast of the Mediterranean. And when we look at this reconstruction drawing, we can see the octagonal plan. This is based on archaeology. This is not completely made up. Obviously, a lot of it is made up, but the octagonal plan, we are sure that was there. We have the Forum Temple complex here in the lower city. We have the walls going around the city. Baths, I don't know for sure where they are, but they are there. The theater we can see here, amphitheater, and then the circus, which is interestingly between the lower and the upper city. And the upper city, as you can see, is not much of a city. It's more of a massive forum complex. This is thought to be the seat of the provincial governor. And the orientation of the combination of the circus and the so-called palace reminds us of Rome. So we can have this idea, Gallius has said, that the colonies are small copies of Rome, but this does ring a bit like Rome. This is like the Palatine Hill with the imperial palace and the Circus Maximus bordering it, but then in small in a provincial capital. Turning to another city, we have Segovia. Again, the orb, so it's the city, it's the main place of the Civitas. At first sight, we don't clearly see an octagonal plan here. This could be, of course, the result of the way it is at this moment known and excavated. Nonetheless, we do see the forum, the temples, a small temple here, the forum. I'm not mistaken, that's the a small temple to the emperors. The baths, do believe me, they're here. Theater, we can see. The walls I've forgotten. So this is an octagonal tower, part of the wall. The wall goes behind the theater and the amphitheater, which we can find here. And the circus, do believe me, this picture is taken from, I guess, a plane or a helicopter. It's older than the drones. But it's above the circus. So the circus is underneath this, the lower end of, should have been at the lower end of this picture. So it's a small city where Taraco is about 80 hectares. This is only 10 hectares. A small city with a lot of monumentality, which we can explain through its resources. Segovia is, and this is of importance when we look at the territories, Segovia is a mining city that did lapis specularis mining. And this lapis specularis is a see-through stone we can see depicted here. It's found in the soils around the city. You can mine it, and you can actually find it like this on the ground. This is unprocessed, unpolished lapis specularis. You can imagine if you mine this in large slabs, you can actually make windows out of it. And we know from Herculaneum and Pompeii that this material was used, and even the material from Segovia was used. So this was exported throughout the empire and led to a very rich place that could monumentalize and fit the idea of the city. So turning back to our equation, orbs et territorium est civitas, we have to look at the territory. And again, we can turn to the laws and check what elements are mentioned there. We see boundaries, roads, buildings are mentioned, the passage rights, funerary rites, laws for burying people, land use, what is public, what is private land, how is this regulated, and the woods, the fields, and the water, watering rights. So all this is regulated in laws. And then we can turn to the territories of the cities I just mentioned. So Tarraco had a territory, and possibly a massive territory. The territory reconstructed by archaeologists is this one. What I noticed doing my research is that most cities we know of are quite far away from Tarraco. Subur is not certain it's there, it could have been there. And we're not certain whether it's actually a city or a secondary place, so subordinate to Tarraco. But what we see at 16 hours, most cities are located. So Tarraco had a massive territory, possibly even larger than this. The small rectangle is what we see here, and that's a territory close to Tarraco, only at 4 hours walking. You can see here. And we can see how the city located here has indeed, as we saw in the earlier picture, controlled the landscape. So we see this reorganization, decentralization, as that's called, from the city. We actually know exactly from where it was measured in the city itself, because you can see that it's not at the same angle from the city. And this has to do with the points from where the territory was measured. And in the territory, you can see here, you can see villi, rural sites, villages, quarries, milestones showing the roads where they're going. And unfortunately not the boundary stones, because the boundary was most likely a lot farther away. Segobriga, we even have Pliny talking about the territory of Segobriga. And what Pliny says is that the lapis specularis, so the specularis stone, is found 100 miles around the urbum, the orbs of Segobriga, Segobrigam urbum. So again, I've mapped this. This is the 100 miles, Roman miles line, Segobriga. What we see again, it's quite interesting, is that indeed most cities are further away than this 100 miles, apart from Caraca. And we can also see is that the mines are mostly located. So these are lapis specularis mines. I realized that choosing red for cities and red for mines is not the most ideal color scheme. Should have changed that. But believe me, these are the cities, so put the names, and these are the mines, and then the black dots are secondary settlements to, most likely, to Segobriga. And these are the walking, the 3 and the 6 hour walking distances. So we can see how far cities are apart. We see Segobriga must have had a massive territory. So we have the orbs and we have these territories. Other cities like Complutum, Titucia, Caraca, Ercavica, we can see they must have had smaller territories because they're touching, they're close to each other. And others might have had larger cities. And in some regions, we don't know of cities. There haven't been cities. We just don't know. We also have land deeds, so the granting of land from the Iberian Peninsula. So this is an inscription from the city of Iliki, and it organizes the land of the colony. Iliki is a colony, and when a colony is created, colonists come in, often from other places, as we can see. So people are mentioned with their origin, and they get tracts of land, so they get pieces of land. And if we look where the people are coming from, it's actually quite far away. Not surprising to find people from the Iberian Peninsula. Baleares is also a part of the province Hispania Quiterior. Icosium in Africa, actually we have 3 people coming from there. It's not a surprise if we know that Icosium is one of these strange contributed civitates. We don't know much about it, but we know from Pliny that Icosium was a contributed civitas to Iliki. most likely Icosium was part of the Roman Empire before the creation of the province of Africa. And because the Roman Empire, everything has to go through the provinces, Icosium was then put under control of Iliki. So that way it became part of the province of Kiterior. But then when Iliki became a colony, people from Icosium were granted land, the territory was divided. And the organization of this territory was an official thing. This is not a simple, as I showed, like I walk for 6 hours, I meet the next guy. And there was an official dividing of the land, which was then marked by boundary stones, the terminus. And this is one Augustalis. So this is a terminus sanctified by the emperor between the colony of Okubi and the colony of Augusta Merita. So Augusta Merita, I already mentioned, is the provincial capital of Lusitania, and its territory was adjacent or had a boundary with that of Okubi. Unfortunately, we don't have, and again, there's the map to show where they are. Unfortunately, we don't have all the boundary stones. We just have the few. So we know of a few places that communities were adjacent to each other. And then for the few we have, not all of them are found in situ at the original spot. So we can't recreate the whole, all the territories of the cities. So the classical model, we have the orbs with all these things we're looking for, and we have the territory with all the things we can look for to understand how the city and its territory worked. So then we have created this beautiful image of the Roman world. So this is a Roman forum. It's actually the Forum Romanum in the HBO series of Rome. But we are missing something. And we are missing something big here. We have been missing for the presentation so far. And that's the people. The people that create the city, that are the city, and they decide in the end what the city looks like. Without the people, it's just an empty space. And we have to keep in mind that these people have agency. They are doing stuff as well. They have rights in the Roman city. So turning back to law, we can actually see people being mentioned. So in the Lex Ienitana, or the Lex Flavia Municipalis, it starts with the, at least the section we have starts with the municipes and the incula. You might remember that we are missing quite a bit of the first tablets. But the municipes and inculae, the municipes are the people with citizen rights of that place, of the municipium. And then the inculae are the people from outside that have come into the city. And then we see the things people have to do. So they have to be available for work for the community 5 days a year. They have to uphold the law. We always hope that. The public service. They have the right to vote in their own community. So they vote for the magistrates and who can govern the city. They have the right of legal representation when they are being stated that they are not upholding the law. And they have the right of compensation when the community, for instance, wants their land, then they need to be compensated for taking the land. I just said that the magistrates are being elected. So this is, of course, one of the important things in every community. It's the way it's governed. And the cities of the Roman Empire are governed quite a bit like Rome. So the standard magistracies are the duumviri, the two men, which are two. The aediles, which are the people in charge of, for instance, the games and the buildings, etc. So the duumviri are the mayors. The aediles are for games, for buildings. Two of them. Quaestores are in charge of the money, two of those as well. And then the decuriones, the ordo decurionem, the city council, which we think was about 100 people, but we are pretty certain that for some places this might be slightly too much. The community was most probably too small to have an order of 100 people most likely everybody would be in an order then. And then we have the augures and the serviers. These are religious positions. And people are proud of their functions in the cities. So we have here Lucius Musinius Apronianus, who was edile, who was a questor, who was a duumvir. He was a duumvir quinquennalis, which means that he was a duumvir in the lustrum of the city, which means that he was in charge of the census, counting the number of people, deciding who was allowed citizenship. So he has been duumvir twice, and not of the least place, of the Colonia Julia Urbs Triumphalis Tarraconensis, Tarraco, the provincial capital. And he was a flamen to the cult of Trajan. And this is a funerary stone, as you can see from Heredes Ex Testamento. So people were proud of what they did, and they put it on funerary stones. They also put it on honorific statues. So this is actually statue base. Would have been a statue of him on top of this. So if you look at that all the picture I showed earlier on, this is what we were forgetting. Well, we had one person, a shepherd, but we're forgetting all the people in this model, and this is what we have to keep in mind. What are the people doing? And they might have said, why do we need a city? And for that, we're now turning into the Civitas Hispaniae, so into these communities in Spain. So a quick overview of the quite lengthy conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. So this is the Iberian Peninsula then. And in 218, the Romans landed here at the Porion to liberate Saguntum, which is roughly where the name of Valencia is, from the Carthaginian control. And we can see that slowly they started conquering. And whilst conquering, they were founding places all over the Iberian Peninsula. But you can already see here that this is not working. If these are all the places you have created, you're not going to control a massive territory as the Iberian Peninsula. Obviously 206. Italica being founded by Scipio Almost Africanus, not yet deserved the title Africanus. In 4 years, he will be known as Scipio Africanus. The first legal bronze inscription for the Iberian Peninsula regards the settlement of the Turris La Scutana. We know from the sources that Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus the Elder has founded the city of Gracuris, and we found an inscription of Iliturgis that claims to be founded by Gracchus as well. We state claims because the inscription is quite a bit later than the founding of the supposed founding of Iliturgis by Gracchus. By the way, all these dates are before Common Era. Cartea, which becomes a Latin colony. An interesting case mentioned in the ancient sources where the soldiers that fought in the Iberian Peninsula request settlement. They are veterans, they are allowed to settle somewhere, and they want a colony with land granted. Often then they also get, normally they get Roman citizenship, so that would be a Roman colony. However, in this case, they married local women, and their children are therefore not Roman citizens. And that's when the Senate decides that they become a Latin colony. So they have a lower form of citizenship. You have Roman citizenship and Latin citizenship. And then Valencia, founded in 138 by Junius Brutus. Making a giant leap into the Flavian period, we can look at Pliny's work and start understanding the terminology being used and how the terminology works. So I said that the civitas is orbs et territorium, and we've seen Segobriga being called orbs in Pliny. We have seen in the title of Tarraco that it's called orbs. So these are cities, these are urbes. Another word often used for a town or city is oppidum. So you can see here, those are the green ones. There's quite a bit of them. The Colonia de Municipia, and then we have the word civitas being used, and then populus. So this is of importance because it has been argued that when Pliny mentions a populus, he does not mention a civitas, that's a tribe governed by Rome, and these tribes are not urban. And that would explain exactly why the Northwest is actually quite empty, apart from these weird places that apparently are civitates. So we have to look into this. And what is of utmost importance, I believe, is the fact that Pliny mentions places multiple times and then changes the way he refers to places. So we see here one of the best examples, I believe, Juliobriga, which is a civitas, which has, we can see the pentagonal shape of the oppidum and the populus. So it has been mentioned in 3 different ways. Bracara Augusta is an oppidum and a civitas. Bad mapping on my side. There is the sign of a municipium underneath Olisipo, modern-day Lisbon. So we can see that Pliny is mixing and matching the terminology. So we can't just say something is known as a populus and therefore it's a tribe. Just leave it at that. There's no city, it's a tribe. It's a tribe governed by Rome. If you go deeper into Pliny, I have the Latin here, the translation. The province has 293 states, civitates, besides those dependent on others. I said before that we had these contributed that were mentioned. We don't know enough about. We have 179 cities, oppida, and of these 12 are colonies, 13 cities with the rights of Roman citizens. So that's the higher one. 18 with the old Latin rights. This is of importance because Pliny is using Augustan sources. So we have places with the old Latin rights in Augustan period. When Pliny is writing in the Flavian period, that's at the time Vespasian has decided to give all of the 3 provinces of Hispania, all the Hispanian provinces, Latin rights. So at that point, every community has Latin rights. So Pliny here specifies there were 18 with the old Latin rights. So these are 18 places that had Latin rights before the grant by Vespasian. There's 1 confederate town and there are 135 tributary towns. So for the people either quite quick in calculating or secretly reading the slide, we have 293 civitates, so that should be orbs et territorium, but then we have 179 cities. So apparently there are 114 civitates that do not have an orbs or oppidum. The question is, what are these? Where are these? And how were these places governed? Why didn't they need a city? What do people have said? Why do we need a city? Going deeper into Pliny, we find that he not only mentions the provinces as a whole, but also goes into this substructure of the conventus and says, in a similar manner, the 24 states, he uses the word civitates, of the jurisdiction of the Bracari, so the jurisdiction is the conventus, contain a population of 175,000, among whom, besides the Bracari themselves, we may mention, without wearying the reader, the Bibali, the Culerni, the Galaici, the Hequasi, the Limici, and the Quaecerni. These 4 we will focus on. So the 4 colored ones, Bibali, Limici, Culerni, and Quaecerni, because these are of interest. We can find these in other sources as well. Turning to Ptolemy, Detlefsen in 1853, I'm not mistaken, has said, Ptolemy, in comparison to Pliny, has something really interesting going on. He's mentioning the populus, the tribes, and he mentions centers with them. So normally he refers to polis, but for this region, he mentions populis, the tribes or the sub-organizations, and then he says they're city, they're polis, but we should not take literally. Most likely just means center, is these. So we have the Coilerni with this place called Colliobriga as their main settlement. And Briga, we know from the Celtic languages, is a fortified settlement. So probably this was an actual town. The Bibali have the Forum Bibalorum, or Foros Bibalon. And Forum, we know, that's one of those buildings. So why is there only being referred to a building here? The same goes for the Limiki. So they only have the building being mentioned and not the, They only have the building mentioned. And most likely that is because it's only the marketplace that was in the center as the central place of these two peoples. And then the Guayquerni are mentioned as Hdata or Aqua, which is a natural spring. So the most important thing for these people, apparently, according to Ptolemy, are the natural springs. And we can continue looking at the ancient sources, trying to find these places. And again, we find these 4 places on the Padrão dos Povos. Sorry, that's my Portuguese. Padrão dos Povos in Chaves, Portugal. It's an inscription commemorating the building of a bridge. This is a replica still at the bridge. And it mentions the 10 places, civitates, that have contributed to constructing this bridge. And again, we find in here the Bibali, Quelerni, Limiki, and Guayquerni, and actually the Aquae Flaviae, the Aquae Flaviensis. So another aquas with the nice reference to the Flavian emperors. The Abesoki is kind of a weird one. We don't know exactly, as you can see. It's partially lost. The reconstruction is based on earlier readings. And as you can notice, they're on alphabetical order. So there's a whole discussion that this cannot be there. Alphabetically, it should not be there. And we can see another Briga, of course. So again, in one of these places. The Edict of Bierzo is an edict by Augustus, 15 BCE, granting rights to a castellum, a fortified place. We can see it here, the Castellanos Pameo-Brigenses. So this is the Briga again. It's a fortified settlement. But we're not interested in this bit. We're interested in this bit. So we have here the Gentes Susarorum mentioned. So Gentes, again, it's often said, well, it's a tribe. It's not important, just a tribe. We have the ex gente Gigurorum. So these are the Giguri again, we've seen now. And no, we have not seen the Giguri, but they're interesting. They're mentioned here. They're referred to as a gente, just like the Susari. Now, unfortunately, it's only the Susari that are being mentioned as civitas. But a gente can be a civitas. That's what it states here. So likely the Giguri, this is their territory, this is where they are, was an official civitas. Actually, it is mentioned by Pliny and Ptolemy. So we have the Foros Gigurorum, and we have the Giguri being mentioned by Pliny, and we have the Gente Gigurorum mentioned in the Edict of Bierzo. When we turn to the archaeology of this territory, we see that we have the settlement of Aproba, 7.5 hectares, which has the octagonal road plan and the sewer. So these are elements we expect in the law to be in a city. 7.5 hectares is not big, by the way. And then we have Asigaroza, which is 5 hectares, even smaller. It's at the bridge crossing. It has not the bridge with the inscription at Chaves, but another bridge. It has a bath complex. We find mosaics, columns, and funerary inscription. Yeah, so something is happening there. It's a really rich place. And there's quite some discussion going which of the settlements is actually the center, the capital of this civitas. And when we look at the settlement pattern, we can see all these, well, in this case, they're not oppida or mentioned as oppida, but these are castors, these are fortified settlements, all over, dotting the whole valley. And then we see some rural settlements. Of the castros, I have to admit that we don't know exactly which ones were inhabited throughout the Roman period. Some of them were inhabited throughout the period into late antiquity, but we don't know for all of them. And we see religious inscriptions also dotting the land. We see a milestone here, which has led to the changing of the route of the road. So the road was thought to go this way, passing this fortified settlement. But now we know it has gone up there, then past the Statio, the roadside settlement, and into the territory of the Bergidenses. By the way, the Susari are located here. So that was the other community mentioned in the Edict of Bierzo. The Forum Limicorum, so we've seen that one as well in Ptolemy and in Pliny, and mentioned in the Pedrodos Povos, but also 3 times the Civitas Limicorum is mentioned in inscriptions within the territory of this Civitas. So this is certainly a Civitas and accepted by Rome, because these inscriptions are honorific and votive inscriptions and honorific to the emperor. So there's inscriptions erected to the emperor by the Civitas, the Limici. But so again, the Limici, we have the territory in red. By the way, the blue is walking distance, 3 hours from what is often perceived as the central settlement. And for Cinque de Limia, it's actually quite a good central settlement for the valley. So we can see it's centrally within the valley. It controls the roads. It's nicely on the road crossing. These are milestones that have been found, so we can recreate the roads. So these bits are certain. These are less certain. Probably they have been recreated using traces that have been found. But Cinque de Limia is certainly at road crossing. It's 5 hectares. It still holds the modern day place Cinque de Limia, still holds the name of the ancient community. But the problem is that in Ocella da Pena, which is also known as Acida, the city, nowadays, that's where we find the epigraphy. So that's where the Civitas Limicorum is putting up a epigraphy to the emperor as religious epigraphy. So the question is, what is going on here? We know that Ptolemy calls it the Forum of the Limici. So maybe there is only a forum here, and the elite, so the people who are governing this Civitas, are living up in the mountains still here, honoring the emperor, commemorating their political life far away from where we expect them to be. And there might have been 2 cities, or maybe no city at all. So that was the northwest, where, so as we can see, again, also the Limici have a dot. Not that different. The position is not that different from the one of the Liguri, because they're very close to each other. We see here also the Culerni and the Coiquernai. So it's logical. We have this inscription on the bridge, and you're not going to build a bridge together if you're not close to each other. But now going to a completely different part of the Iberian Peninsula, back to the east. And this is where we find places, and here I'm going out far, to put this idea of let's forget about proper cities. Let's not look all the time for cities that fit exactly what we have been stating that a city has to be. And that's also is one of these examples I think might not have been an official city. It was a recognized municipio. It's a pre-Roman place, we know from minting. So this is Iberian script. It's the Iberian language. Auskesken, that's the name we know. So they minted coins before the Roman presence. There's no chronological depth in this map. These are the fortified settlements. Some of them are pre-Roman. Most of them continued into the Roman time. And we can see how they actually control quite some important places. So we see this one controlling the entrance here. It's quite off. Puig Castellet is spot on the road. L'Izquierda is on the river. which makes a bend here, and close to the road, and Puigcardial, again, up here, controlling this entrance. We have a military camp and a later settlement here, and then also with some villas and some rural sites. Again, the milestones, quite old milestones, Republican milestones. It's a well-known place, so it's referred to by many sources as an important settlement. So we see all these classical sources mentioning it. But when we look at the archaeology, there's actually only one thing that stands out, and it really stands out. It's the temple. There is a temple, and besides the temple, there is not much that has been found. And part of it is that it's the modern city of Vich, that's on top of it. So that makes it really hard to find out what was going on exactly. Funny bit of history here is that this temple was lost for quite a while, actually unknown, because it was inside a castle, and it was just one of the rooms of the castle. So it was hidden inside a castle, and only later it was discovered that there was still a Roman temple still standing, and that's why it has been preserved this well. But besides this temple, there's not much happening in this city. There's almost no people living there. Can we call it a city then? And we have a similar case going here, Iulia Libica. So again in the east, but up in the mountains. And I think the mountains are an important part for this idea of should there be a city or not. Again, mentioned by quite some sources. This map has some depth because there's a really interesting situation going on there. The Republican sides in black, we can see, are up in the hills. They're not in the plain. There are some fortified settlements, again, on the fringes of the plain, not fully in the plain. This one has a P in it because there's also a processing site for the mining, which has been found here. And then we see the white dots, and these are the imperial settlements. So we can see that people are moving into the valley. Some people are moving just a bit. And we have the creation of Iulia Libica, so the settlement which is thought to be the central settlement for the area. And again, we have the walking distance from Iulia Libica, so we can see it controls the settlement quite, the basin quite well. Interestingly, we have some altars outside the city, and we have inscriptions. So most of them in the mountains. We call them rock. These are rock inscriptions, so the white ones. Also often called rural, but that's not a really good name because they're not in a city. But to call everything outside of a city rural, that's slightly too simple. The only thing we have at Iulia Libica is a forum, a quite impressive forum, and some rich residences. This is not a proper city. So what we have here is the forum of a place with the temple, the portici, some for the top of a votive altar found, and there are some more votive altars. And these are quite interesting because both these votive altars found outside of the city are to Jupiter. And Jupiter is one of the gods that belongs, it's the main god. And the cult of Jupiter is associated with the city, with the political center. And it's interesting that these are not in a proper place. They are not where they're supposed to be. I'm not saying that every altar that's outside of a city to Jupiter is a weird one out, but it's interesting to see that these are not found in the city. More importantly and more interestingly is this rock inscription, which is quite interesting. So that's the way it looks. This is a drawing, and that's the reading. So Bella Gaisco Filius, so Bella, son of Gaisco. Bella Bastobles Filius. Adinildir, Betepe, and we guess, again, Filius. And then an interesting one, because the names we had so far do not ring, well, Bella might ring a bell, but not as a male name. And then we have Cornelius, which is a Roman name. This is not a Roman name, Erdoildir Filius. So these are 4 men, scriptum est, quator viratum. So I mentioned earlier the magistrates, the duumviri, the duovires, the 2 men, the 2 main men of the city, of the civitas, governing the civitas. We have multiple inscriptions mentioning quator viri, 4 men. There's a discussion that either the quator viri might be a different form of the duumviri, so instead of having 2 men, communities could have had 4 men in the place of the duumviri, or the quator viri being the ediles and the duumviri together. So that could be that's the meaning of quator viri. But of importance is that this is an inscription commemorating the magistrates of these 4 men with clearly Iberian descent, of which one has accepted the Roman name. So in my thesis, I've called this new form of civitas the dispersed civitas. It's a civitas that's not focused on one settlement, but people are living dispersed outside the city. So there is the absence of a capital, although the existence of the civitas is proven. So these are the things we have to keep in mind when thinking about this civitas. There is no clear capital, but the civitas does exist. The administrative center we have, like the forum, is not fitting the idea of a classical Roman city. I mean, yes, we can just ignore the fact that there is no city, but there is just a temple or just a forum and keep calling it a Roman city. But that just brings us off what is happening in the Roman world, because we keep thinking in this classical idea, every civitas has an orbs and a territory. Whereas there might not be an orbs, I believe. There might be places that do not fit the idea of the classical Roman city. And still these are accepted by Rome as self-governing communities. And lastly, there could be several settlements of similar order without the possibility to create a settlement hierarchy. So you've seen in the case of the Limici that there is the forum and there is the Castro up in the hills where the inscriptions are found. So there's 2 places, and the same for the Giguri. There's 2 places, and we don't know for sure which one is the capital. Now, obviously, this all stands and falls with what we know. So we might call something a dispersed civitas and then later on discover that actually there is a massive site and there is a city. So we should be careful claiming that all the civitates we know little of are dispersed. But I think we should also be careful always trying to hunt down the city in every civitas. There might be civitates that were not governed by a city. And I think the local populace might have said to the Romans, why do we need a city? 谢谢 for your attention, for being here, and I hope you have